It is now the starting time. If any of your friends out there are dragging their feet and taking too long to get here, that is their loss because we get started on time. So, uh, to get things started, you are, like I was mentioning earlier, you guys are in the right place. This is the Qodo webinar. We're going to walk you through all the awesome things that we're doing with AI tools that span across the SDLC. We're building a platform of tools that meet developers where they are. But to get things started, I'm Jonathan. I'm one of the co-hosts today. I am a member of the solution engineering team here at Qodo. Naina, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, I'm Naina, developer relations, developer advocate at Qodo, and very excited to be here participating in another webinar. I've been in a streak now with you ever since I joined. I'm very proud of this.
And I have failed to scare her away every single time. See, she's back for more punishment. So, in any case, so to get things started, few housekeeping items for everybody. Chat is disabled, and then also you're all on mute, so you don't need to worry about coming off of mute or anything like that while you're like talking to your children at home or whatever the case may be. But you do have access to this Q&A chat box. I highly encourage if you're using the Zoom interface, go ahead and pull up the Q&A chat box. You might need to click on the More button to be able to open that up. That is how you will communicate with us. During this meeting, this will not just be for questions. Like, Jonathan, why are you wearing purple today? It could be it could be anything else, like, hey, I'm having trouble hearing you, or you're not sharing your screen, or anything else you need to communicate with us. That is how you will do so. Um, that said, I think there anything else we need to cover, Nana, before we jump into this?
I think we're good to go. Might as well
All
jump
right.
in.
I was just racking my brains. Like, is there anything else I say before we get started? So let's go ahead and get started. So kicking things off, let's talk a little bit about a high level overview of what Codo is about. So, as I mentioned, we're building a platform of things. I'm going to kind of walk through these, and these are the things we're going to be covering today during the demo and the presentation. At the bottom level here, kind of core capabilities. I just want to give you guys a heads up on some of the underlying technologies and whatnot that we're using. Um, as you would expect, as many vendors are doing today, we're using a wide variety of AI models. The reality is, and you guys may have experienced this if you've been playing with AI tools for as long as I have, that AI models kind of leapfrog each other over time. And so, like, whatever is the latest and greatest model, whether it's from Gemini or from Anthropic or from OpenAI, we always have those. And that makes it really easy. We'll be showing you that as we get into the demo. Additionally, you'll observe this Codo aware block in here. This is an underlying foundational technology that's used across our tools. What this is it's code-based indexing. Now, this is not, some of you might be saying in your heads, oh, it's RAG. It's not just RAG. In fact, we've built a really kind of an agentic code-based understanding engine. And so there's a whole lot that goes into it underneath the covers. This is not a deep dive into Codo Aware today, but I just want to highlight that on a nightly basis, can we not only index your code base repositories, but that we can actually pull in that context, whether you're in CodoGen, which is our IDE extension, where you might be writing code and you want to access remote repositories that are not on your laptop. That might be like the backend service that connects to your front end service, or an internal component library, or whatever that might be. You can access that without having to clone the repo locally. And that helps to kind of improve the results you're going to get from a coding perspective, especially if like you're doing like a refactoring or something like that. And you're like, okay, I need to refactor the thing that's going on in this project that's right here locally in front of my face. But as I do so, is there any downstream impacts that might affect other projects, other repos out there I need to be aware of? Those are the sorts of things you could do with that. Codo Merge. This is our code review tool. If any of you haven't been observing this with the advent of generative AI inside of our IDEs and code completion and code generation and whatnot, it's actually shifted a bottleneck. A lot of us are actually writing code faster. But like now it's kind of caused a more of a bottleneck on the code review side of thing, which frankly, I don't think code reviews is anything that's ever brought any of us job satisfaction or great amounts of it. There are some people I've met though that are those people, and those people are pretty awesome and they're worth their weight in gold. But in any case, we do AI-based code reviews as well to kind of help out in catching issues and whatnot that not only humans might miss, But also, if you think about it, oh, one of the problems we run into, if any of you do code reviews, is a lot of times you're giving feedback on the same types of items, maybe to different people, maybe to the same people who never learn their lessons. How can I make it so that AI can maybe catch a lot of those surface issues and then inform the code author so that they can start fixing those things before I get involved, so I have less work to do and the code review process just goes faster, right? It's a higher velocity, a lower amount of time to be able to ship that code and merge that code and whatnot. And so today during the demo, we're going to talk about all of these things within the context of a developer flow. Plan, write, test, review, manage. And so that's kind of the starting point. I'm going to check for questions, but also, Naina, is there any initial thoughts or additional color or things that I might have missed that you'd want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to mention about Codo Aware and like this whole agentic code-based understanding. Like one frame of mind, I like to think about it. It's like it's this solution to context engineering. So
Mm.
that everyone's been talking about, of like how can we? This is an issue that we're noticing right now in current features or tools that we're using for AI coding. And how can we improve that? Well, we can improve that with optimal context. And this seems to be like the perfect, tool that is handling that on the behalf of the developer. The entire architecture, the process it takes to maintain and sustain context over time, and CodeAware is the solution for that. So that's how I like to, I guess, articulate that. But there is a question here from Jessica Pereira, and is Codo Merge available for Azure? This is a popular question,
It's a popular topic internally right now. We've been recently getting an influx of questions. I'm assuming by Azure you mean Azure DevOps. We do not support that quite yet. It's something it's avidly being talked about internally because we've recently had other customers and whatnot ask very similar questions. That said, if you want to send us an email and say like, "Hey, I'm interested in Azure DevOps," we can add you to the list because we would love to hear from you and we would like to make sure that you're notified once we do have support for that. Right now, we do have support from a technology supports perspective. I think this is a good transition. So for Codo Merge, we do support GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, no Azure DevOps today. We've recently added some limited support for even Garrett, which some people use. And then also for CodoGen, which is our code which is a code generation tool sits in your IDE. We're actually, I think this is an important note. We're not like you might guys might be familiar with like the VS Code forks out there. It's like an entire IDE with kind of the agentic part built into it. We are a plugin for IDEs. So the idea is we're focused on enterprise. So we not only support VS Code as a plugin, you can go search CodoGen or just Codo inside of your VS Code marketplace and we'll show up. But then also we support JetBrains. So, if you've got Java developers out there, they're almost always going to be on IntelliJ. And then we even support Visual Studio because, again, another scenario where if like you're a .NET developer, like almost always you're using Visual Studio. You're not going to use Visual Studio Code or anything else. And so we do support those. And then last but not least, something we probably won't spend time on today, but I do want to highlight, you guys can Google it. We have a product called Qodo Command. It's a CLI-based tool. In fact, some of you may have noticed a surge in the industry of like CLI-based tools rather than IDE-based tools. And so we're there too. Like you can actually run like Qodo from your terminal and do coding with it. We have a web interface you can spin up if you want. Really exciting stuff. I don't think we're going to cover it today though, but definitely I encourage you to take a look at that. So the last thing I'll just note then is actually let's take a quick look at other questions and then we'll move on. Does this support writing Terraform code for Google Cloud deployments? Yes. In fact, not only writing Terraform code, but reviewing Terraform code, infrastructure as code in general, and I think it's the same person. Yes, or infrastructure as code in general for any of the clouds. Absolutely. I'll admit that our technology typically is mostly used by your traditional software engineers, but like it's something that I do see other audiences using our product on a regular basis. One of those would be like SREs, DevOps, other people who are kind of coding adjacent, if you will. So definitely something that to keep in mind as we dive into this. So let's go ahead and move along then. So today, what we're going to be covering, I already mentioned kind of the flow that we're going to be going through. We're going to be talking about kind of like this learn, research, understand code. This is a very popular functionality from our product. A lot of us, it saves us a bucket load of time. If any, some of you might be thinking to yourselves like, I am not in a mode where like I want to vibe code, right? Like some of you are very averse to that. In fact, we're selling to enterprise software engineers. They're very averse to that. They're not doing greenfield projects or personal projects. They're dealing with large, complex code bases where there might even be compliance involved with how they implement things or major impacts as a result of that. So they need to be particular about this. And so this whole research and understanding code thing is really kind of a very popular functionality. We'll be talking about that. Then we'll be talking about how you can use us not just to write code, but use an intermediary step, kind of guardrails, if you will, of using AI to actually plan what it is that you're going to do before actually doing it. And then also about, we'll talk briefly about testing and then also about code reviews. So as part of that, and we talked about context a little bit. We talked about this idea of remote context, which is done through Qodo Aware, and Naina brought up this idea of code of context engineering, which is really critical. In fact, I might just note on that. Like some of you may have observed, like Gemini has like a 1 million token context window. It's huge. You could fit like I think you fit roughly like 50,000 lines of code into that context window. And then Claude 4, I think they're going to be rolling out like if they haven't already, like a 1 million context token context window too. The problem is not the size of the context window, but you encounter this scenario where the larger the context gets, you encounter what some people call like a context rot, context atrophy. There's different terms for it out there. And so like just throwing lots of context at it, like I've got this huge mono repo I want to throw at this context window doesn't make it better. It actually can dilute what you really need. And so we do a lot of context engineering stuff behind the scenes to help out with that. But there's a bunch of other context that's also needed to help you be successful, right? So you've got the local code, right? We do that agentically. We'll actually search through the local code to understand how that works and whatnot. But then there's other pieces that go into the context too. Like, for example, maybe you're trying to work off of a Jira ticket and you want to use like an Atlassian MCP server, or you want to, I don't know, look at like the latest GitHub pull requests. Whatever the case may be, there's MCP servers for a lot of things to bring in additional third-party information into the context of what you're currently working on. And then lastly, a couple of other pieces. We one of the things we'll be talking about during today is about the implementation of best practices. If you have certain practices that exist either at an organizational level or even at a project level, like you have certain ways that you want things to be coded on a project you're working on, you can actually add that right into the project and we'll automatically use that for both code generation and code reviews. For example, like every time for every function in this repo that we create, it should always have this long fancy doc string. I know that's a silly example. Some of us don't want that, but like will automatically see that. And then when Qodo Gen is generating code, it'll make sure there's a long fancy doc string. And then when you get to the code review part, if someone didn't include the long fancy doc string, we'll call it out and say like, hey, you didn't include the long fancy doc string. And then lastly, user instructions. So at a user level, we're going to be talking about ways that you can kind of automate things, tailor things to how you as a developer might operate, regardless of best practices and other things like that. And so let's go ahead and dive into it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually flip over to VS Code right now, which, by the way, again, I am using VS Code, but like we do support all the JetBrains IDEs as well as Visual Studio. I had to pick one IDE today, guys. So if we have any like JetBrain elitists in the audience, please forgive me. Don't be a hater. Let me go ahead and shift over to that. While I do that, by the way, any additional comments or thoughts, Naina?
Yeah, no, I mean, I loved everything that you said. I think like the docstring uh point that you made is it sounds funny, but it is so real. Like I'm just remembering how many conversation like back and forth I would have between the team members about just tiny little like one-liner, each line of code. And if like we're trying really hard to align with certain best practices that have been established internally, it's like those little things will actually be a conversation to have. So it's nice that
Yeah.
I can actually just whatever it is generating, it can just fall in line by default, and you can go from there. You know what I mean?
Exactly, exactly. And we'll talk a little bit more about best practices as we get into it too. But like, so let's dive in. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with really kind of the first part of this. Like, I'm in a project, and maybe some of you guys can empathize. Like, you probably know nothing about this project. It's called Screenshot to Code. It's actually a very popular repo on GitHub. It's open source. It's got like 70,000 stars on it. It's got like a Python backend, a TypeScript React front end. Probably none of those things you care about because it's not your code, right? But nonetheless, pretend for a moment that like you're new at this company and they've got this product they sell. It's called Screenshot to Code. And the users are reporting stack traces and you want to go ahead and figure out how to solve that. Or you're being asked to build new features and you're wondering like, well, where in the code base would I do that? Or how does it work? How does it already work today? These are the sorts of things a lot of us go through. And so as part of that, like let's start, for example, like I want to add support like a model that came out recently that some people talk about, like Grok, right? I want to add support for Grok as an LLM. How would I do that? Now, one of the interesting things, and some of you who have played around with AI might be aware of this, if you use like a model like Claude 4 Sonnet, which is probably the most popular model for like software engineers right now, is like that it's pretty eager. It almost like acts like an over caffeinated junior developer in many cases. Like it just wants to get busy, right? Like you ask it a question, and before you know it, it's like, and now I'm making changes across your entire project. And so what we've done is we have created guardrails inside of the product. So like we have what are called modes. Now, by default, when you open up the product, some of you may have actually installed the product while we've been talking, if you wanted to follow along. And like you'll notice that down here, there's this code mode that it's in by default. And that's kind of like the default of like how, frankly, like Claude 4 would like to operate. But what I want to do is I want to come in here and I want to use ask. In fact, you're going to notice there's three default modes. There's code, there's ask, and there's plan. Those are going to be the focus today. You will notice, by the way, you have the ability to create other modes, and you can see some examples of modes that I've personally created. Think of them almost like personas. In fact, you could almost like say, like, call code like your junior engineer that you want to task with something. You could call ask your senior engineer who understands the code base. You could call plan your architect. They're basically just personas, if you will. And so in any case, I'm going to go ahead and switch to ask because this is oftentimes where I start. And the beauty of ask is it's purely read only. It can't even, we've turned off any tools that would even allow it to edit code. So like it's not even going to try to do that. And so I'm going to come in here and say, and use ask mode. And I'm going to go ahead and hit enter. And now it's going to go ahead and look through the code and be able to understand how that is implemented. And so I guess as you can see here, it's already going through. It's actually pointing out to me parts of the code base that I would want to look at. So there's actually this file here I'm unaware of called generatecode.py. It looks like I'd have to add an API key there. You get the idea, right? It's helping me to do my research. This saves me a ton of time. I'm not even using it for coding. I'm just using it to be able to understand code. Now from here, what I could do is I could ask further questions. In fact, oftentimes I do. But the other part of this is I can then migrate this into, okay, well, that sounds interesting. I like this. I think it gives me a solid understanding. What I can now do is flip over to plan mode and say like, create a plan to implement this functionality. Now, as part of that, what you're going to observe is this is actually very distinct. Rather than just kind of helping me to gather information like Ask does, Plan is going to take that information, even gather additional information. You can see it's actually reading additional files and whatnot to be able to help put together an actual plan for me to implement this. Now, of course, in a moment, I could ask it to actually implement that plan if I approve of it. But the other thing that I really love about plan mode is it helps me to think this through. In some cases, you guys might even come to the table with a spec, right? You might have a spec in Jira. We've taken this from a user story to a spec, and now you come into here and you could actually use it to, instead of just writing a raw plan like I'm doing here, you could actually use Ask to like review the spec and point out issues that maybe it's missing. Because again, if we want AI to do some of those things for us, we need to make sure it's equipped with what it needs. And so whether I'm using Ask or Plan to help refine a spec even further, this is a very valuable tool. And I've actually, there's been times where like I come with a spec and I say like, what do you think? And it gives me a bunch of questions I hadn't thought deeply enough about. And because it reviewed the code and reviewed the spec and said, hey, what about this? And what about that? And it actually took me an extra 15, 20, 30 minutes to kind of think things through and go back to the drawing board on a few pieces before I was even ready to start laying code out for it. And so, like, just giving you a sense of like the ways that this can be used. And if any of you, for any reason on the call, are like more in the vibe coding mode, where you're like, hey, I want to use Qodo to like build like a weekend project or something like that, I highly recommend using both Ask and Plan very extensively to make sure that when you have it build something for you and generate a couple of thousand lines of code, that it's gonna be in the ballpark of what you're looking for rather than wasting time and effort and otherwise.
That's exactly what I've done recently with the planning and the asking. And it actually, I think the part of the results was that Kodo asked me some questions for clarity at the end of what my intentions were with certain features so that I could get into like the architectural trade-offs of choosing one tool or framework versus another. So it made me think a bit more and then provide those answers before it hit the ground running, which I thought was pretty cool.
Exactly, exactly. Um, so and I had the same thing by the way. Like I was using, I'm not really fluent in like the Slack APIs. I was building a Slack integration for something and like it was helping me to actually think through what sort of APIs I wanted to use to accomplish it. There's like a real-time messaging API and there's like a WebSocket mode and then there's just like and like do I want a bot or not a bot? Like do I want to like it was just like it was wonderful. It helped me kind of get through a lot of that stuff quickly without having to sift through lots of Slack API documentation. Um, so in any case, so that's kind of like that's the first part, right? Is just modes. Using that to ask to plan. I'm not going to go down the path of coding right now. I mean, if you guys really want to see that, I can. In fact, you know what? I should do that just for thoroughness. I'm going to go ahead and say like pretend for a moment that I didn't have any feedback for the plan. I'm going to say implement the code changes and go ahead and let it be able to do that. And so now it's going to go ahead and go step by step, which by the way, again, if you're thinking like from an enterprise software engineering perspective, one of the things that's important here is it's giving me a lot of phases. And that's important in how the way that plan works is that I can come in here and rather than doing everything at once, one of the things when you're coding with AI that a lot of the best AI coders are doing is they're doing frequent commits. And so like if you want it to come in here and say like implement phase 1 or phase 1.1, right? And then test it, make sure it works. Great, it works. Check the box, commit, do a commit. Now move on to the next phase. Do smaller things. Or likewise, since might be a whole project within itself, maybe you break this up into multiple PRs, right? Kind of get to the first part of this, the first half, the first quarter, and say, okay, that's enough for one PR. Let's go ahead and push that. Let's do a code review rather than waiting until there's 500, 1,000 lines of code to a review, and breaking that into smaller things, right? And so I strongly encourage you to be able to do that as well. And you'll, in any case, so I'm going to go ahead and stop it there. What I want to do now is I want to now move in and talk a bit about what is called workflows. So workflows are a really powerful functionality that we recently introduced. So if any of you have used our product in the past and you're looking to see what's new, this is something I want to highlight for you guys. Out of the box, you're going to notice there's certain workflows. There's cleanup, there's docs, there's fix, I believe is one of the defaults, generate best practices, integration test, review, and unit test. I think this is the only one that I've actually created myself recently in this particular account. But in any case, as the names of these imply as out-of-the-box workflows, these are actually for automating things that I don't want to have to like automate. A great example of this would be like Docs. In fact, if you look at the way that Docs is configured, its job here is to go through and write documentation for things. In fact, I've seen people modify this to only focus on the diff. So that basically we'll use the Git tools, look at what are the code changes that have taken place in this branch, and then using those code changes, go and update documentation to reflect the most recent code changes. Like things that you can think about the things in your lives that you would want to automate. That's one example. Or how about like unit tests? I want to write unit tests for my code. This is not only going to write unit tests, this is actually going to go ahead and look to see if there's already a test suite. Should you be adding things to the test suite? If there's not a test suite, help to build the test suite. But then also not just building a bunch of tests and saying, here you go, but actually run the tests and fix failures in the tests or whatnot. Some people I've talked to, they prefer that it doesn't fix the failures. They actually say, I just want you to report the failures so I can assess whether or not the code is broken or the test is broken, right? So, like, you get the idea. Like, you can make this your own. This goes back to the user instructions context I was talking about very early on about, like, how all the different things that can go into context. This is another piece of that. And I'm actually curious at this point, Nana, are there, like, any things that you've seen or that you've thought of that would be something that you would want to see automated?
First of all, I'm loving the ones that currently exist right now, the default workflows. So that's where I'm at, or I guess that's the point of how much I've been using it. But I would imagine that there are some that will pop up in the future, some tedious tasks that I think that a workflow would be able to handle. Like, for example, that diff docs, I love that idea. If it can be
Mm.
only about showing the difference or updating docs based on the difference in the code that you've written in that moment, that would be absolutely fantastic. So that's one thing. Also, and I don't know at what point that this would be applicable, but really good commenting if that's something that would occur in the process of Qodo generating the code, or if that could be a separate process as a workflow for keeping, I guess, different files up to my standard or what I would want, so it can be as explanatory as possible. What do you think about that commenting type of workflow?
I think it's a great idea. I think that like I picture like in general, I picture like a lot of like, and in fact, as I'm looking at some of these, even it seems like there's a theme, right? A lot of these are like almost like post-processing tasks. Like I've already done like the coding, and now I want it to generate unit tests for me, and I want it to review my code, and I want to do cleanup, and I want to do docs. Like it's like one of those things where it's like using AI isn't just about writing code. It's about the research piece. It's about the post processing and so forth. So absolutely. I think that there's also this comment here in chat that I think is also very applicable. Briefly, how are workflows different from creating your own mode? There is sometimes a little bit of a gray area there. Generally speaking, a mode is basically a place where I'm going to be able to interact with the AI in kind of a free text sort of way. Whereas modes are more meant, or so, whereas workflows are meant to be more like pre-bundled, like execute this flow for me. And so, like for example, end-to-end tests. Like I come in here, and this is actually one that I'd written. It's a very simple one. I was actually using this for a project that I was working on where I wanted it to write end-to-end tests for me in Playwright and help me really to help me debug UI things and whatnot. And so like I can go ahead and run that, and it's gonna go off to the races and work on that for me. Instead of me having to like type out those steps. At the same time, though, like in a very similar vein, I actually created a mode called a web UI debugger, right? Slightly different. In a web UI debugger, I'm going in and I'm actually chatting, right? I'm actually coming in and saying, this is the problem I'm seeing in the interface. I want it to work like this, but it's working like that. Or I'm getting this error message, or it's like I click on this button and nothing happens, right? And so like that is more of a mode. I'm chatting back and forth versus using like a pre-contained series of steps that I want it to go through. One of the cool other things I just note about workflows that isn't something that's apparent, but you can actually ask it in the workflow during the steps for it to pause at certain points and seek user interaction. That was the most mind-blowing part to me. I expected fully that like when I come in and execute this, go step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's no pause. It will go all the way to completion, but you can actually ask it as part of the instructions. You can say, run the tests. If any tests fail, pause to get feedback from the user, right? And so like you could put something in there. And so like now I have that kind of stopping point where before it just goes off and starts fixing things, I want it to actually report to me like the current status. So like that, and then when I do that, it will continue on. And so that's another beautiful part I just wanted to highlight. So hopefully that answered your question, um, and gives you a little bit more information on how that would work.
That's awesome.
So
Not tried that yet. Pausing or telling it when you want it to pause so you can be like the human in the loop
That
system.
is that is my confession of the day, by the way. Like I've seen it work. I actually haven't implemented that in my own personal workflows yet. And so I need to actually do that and like and try that myself and get the full wow factor personally.
I might have
Um
to come in and
what's that?
ask a question from Frank. Do you execute each workflow or can you queue all of your workflows to run automatically? They're thinking from like a CI/CD flow example, running all of them sequentially or
Ooh.
you choosing them manually step by step. That is very interesting.
So we don't have a way to string workflows together today that I'm aware of. So there's a couple of thoughts, there's a couple of approaches here. First off, you can concatenate them, right? Put them all into one workflow, right? One giant workflow. You copy and paste, do it. Maybe that's ugly, I don't know, but that would work. The other option you can consider, and again, this isn't part of the scope today because just due to time constraints, but if you look up Qodo command, Qodo command, the CLI based product, if I go in and like, in fact, if I go ahead and just pull up right in here real quick and I go to, where's my terminal window? Over here, terminal. And I come in here and I type in Qodo. This is Qodo command. And what Qodo command does is it's not just a command line where I can do a lot of the things that I can do in chat. It's actually set up in a way that, like, if I go ahead and I'm going to do Qodo dash help dash dash help for a moment. There's a lot of modes that this can run in. This would include that you could run it in an MCP mode where it could be used as an MCP by other tools. You can run this in a webhook mode where it's actually listening to things. It can be run in a CI mode. I just want to emphasize this because, like, if you're thinking about running this in like a CI/CD workflow type of way, this can actually be triggered as like a GitHub action and run in a runner and actually trigger whatever sorts of agents or workflows that you would like. That's another option. If you wanted to explore that, you can either, again, look at the documentation, you can reach out to us. Happy to be able to help you think through how to be able to implement those sorts of things. But it's a really exciting opportunity. I have a fellow solution engineer in my team who's actually doing that with Qodo command right now with a customer where they're having Qodo command get triggered as part of a CI/CD workflow, a GitHub action. And what will happen is it will actually review the code changes in a PR and see if there's tests for those code changes. If there's not, it will go through the process of actually generating the tests to kind of meet their code. What's the word I'm looking for? Their code. What's in testing, like what's it called when you're trying to like measure the percentage of code
Coverage.
coverage? Thank you.
Yes.
I was like, what the heck is the word? But like anyway, they were doing some really cool stuff with that. So this is Qodo Command as a CLI tool in general just has a whole robust amount of additional functionality beyond what Qodo Gen offers. It's just more of an advanced tool that isn't necessarily an entry point for a lot of the people that we're talking to in these webinars. So hopefully that at least gives you a little bit of a sense, a little bit of an understanding of that. Yes, and Marty chimed in with coverage. Thank you, Marty. You saved me if I just read chat. So in any case, let's go ahead and move along then. We talked quite a bit about like researching code, writing code, automating things with workflows and so forth. There's probably a ton more things. There's a ton of use cases that are out there that you could use this for, including like we talked about like documentation, tests, and so forth. But what I want to do now is spend a little bit of time by going over to Qodo Merge, which is our code review tool, and kind of walk you guys through that. And in fact, it's very possible that many of you on the call are already using some sort of AI tool. It might not even be Qodo Gen, and you're thinking like, okay, well, I got an AI tool. Maybe you already like that tool. Let's talk about code reviews with Qodo for a moment that might help complement what you're already using. And so let me switch gears here. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, no, there's my face, guys. I'm really apologetic about that. And then I am going to flip back over to the browser. So think about for just a moment, when you think about code reviews, what are the things that you're expecting from code reviewers? And this is just kind of a high level list, right? And I don't know, Nana, if you're looking at this list or anybody in the audience is looking at this list and you're thinking like what else is missing? What are the other things that like you're expecting? What the reason I'm sharing this with all of you is because these are the things that we're hoping as much as possible we can help offload from your senior engineers who are doing code reviews. This doesn't remove them. In fact, we very much suggest and recommend that you can maintain a human in the loop. But think about it for a moment. When you think about like you go in right now, you create a PR or an MR if you're on GitLab, and how long does it sit there before someone gets to it? Before anybody you get any feedback on that? Depending on the project, depending on the team, the company, depending on how distributed your team is across the world and time zones, like it could be a few hours, maybe same day, or it could be even a few days, especially if you're one of those people that generated like a 1,000 line code diff or something like that. And they're just everyone's trying to avoid it like the plague, right? Like, there's a lot of variables in there, but we've all seen it. So the question that the thing that we want to answer for is one, we want to provide someone immediate feedback. We want to provide them feedback within like 90 seconds. And then two, we want to make it so that when the human code reviewer gets involved, that a lot of their work that they would have had to do has been taken care of, so they have less work to do. They can do the final pass on that. And that also we can provide guidance to that code reviewer to things that maybe they would have overlooked because frankly they're a human and reviewing 500 lines of code is they're going to miss things, right? Assuming that you guys aren't doing smaller PRs. But let me go ahead and dive in and talk a bit about this. Now, I'm going to be using GitHub for the demo today. GitHub is the most prominent, but like we do support GitLab and as well as Bitbucket. And if any of you out there are using Azure DevOps, as we had one person earlier today already, and you want support for that, send us an email, let us know. We'd love to hear from you because I think it's something that a lot of other customers are interested in as well. So when we come down here, let's talk about what's going to happen. So for just a moment, I have created a PR. And as part of creating that PR, Within about 60 to 90 seconds, what you're going to see is the following. The idea is Codo Merge has automated commenting that happens in a very short period from the time that I create the PR. Now, one of the beauties of this, by the way, versus like tools in your IDE that help you to research and build code and review code and so forth, is that this fits naturally into your workflow. There's not really an adoption curve to this. You're going to create a PR like you always have, and it's going to add additional color and help to you. Let me walk you through this. So the first part about this, I, as the user, created a PR as part of my PR description, like many people do. They included like a link to a Jira ticket. And then from there, we first start by appending the user description with our own description. We take all of the code changes and we break this down both into a bulleted list of the changes that have taken place, as well as a diagram walkthrough, which I can zoom into if I want to here, that walks us through the code changes that have been implemented in this PR. So if I am a code reviewer and I was just 5 minutes ago was working on something completely different, and now I'm shifting gears and looking at this thing that you're working on, this helps me to get up to speed very quickly on what's going on. The other cool part is this doesn't get out of date. This is actually, we actually will update this on every commit. We use what we call persistent comments. So rather than posting a brand new comment every time, which by the way, you can have us post a brand new comment every time if you prefer it. But out of the box, what it does is it just goes ahead and just updates the in-place comment and says, okay, they added some more code changes. Let's update their description to reflect that. So it becomes kind of like living documentation. Additionally, you have throughout the product, as I continue to progress through this, it's highly customizable. So like I had one organization I was working with, they're a multilingual organization. They wanted the descriptions to be posted in both English and German. Super easy task for us to be able to do. You just basically add it to the prompt. Now, where it starts to get more interesting is in the form of a PR reviewer guide. So when you take a look at the PR reviewer guide, the first part is that we had this thing called ticket compliance. Now, you're going to see the word compliance thrown around a couple of times during this demo. I just want to highlight that the way we're using compliance isn't like in a regulatory compliance type of fashion. Like if you're not working for like Morgan Stanley, like it doesn't mean this is not for you. No, this is actually for everybody. We're just using the compliance term a little bit liberally. And so what this is doing is it's actually looking at the Jira ticket I linked to earlier, and it uses a Jira integration to go and grab any details from that ticket that might be deemed as a requirement, acceptance criteria, whatever that might be. Even if the title of the Jira ticket was fix XYZ bug and there's no other details, we will use that, right? Because we understand that not all tickets are created equal. We use whatever we can. We try to discern what we can. And from there, we'll look at the code changes and say, okay, here's the things that you're doing right. Here's the things that you're doing not so right. And here's the things that, well, we're not sure if you're doing right or not, that an actual human might need to get involved to kind of verify that this is working the way that you think it should be working. Now, additionally, you'll notice here that we give an estimated effort to review on a scale from 1 to 5. 5 being like block off your calendar, and 1 meaning you could probably get it done during your lunch break, or however you want to handle that. But the idea is, additionally, we have a feature in here that I've actually enabled for this demo. It's called multiple PR themes. In this particular PR, I have like a few hundred lines of code that were added in, which is still pretty big for a PR size. And so it gives me suggestions of how I could break down this PR into smaller themes. And this could also be a great thing to be able to do, right? To give this guidance to a developer who maybe got a little bit too zealous in their PR creation. Um,
I like this.
last, what's that?
I like it. It seems more organized if you want it to be organized, granular, and maybe that would make the review process even faster after AI has that first pass. So,
Exactly, exactly. Or maybe this should be called, do you want a human to actually look at this PR
right.
feature?
Right.
Like break this down into back end and front end stuff, right? Um, So in any case, the last couple of pieces, we give like a recommended area, focus areas for review. And then lastly, this is probably the most interesting one to me, focus areas based on broader code base context. Coming
Hmm.
full circle to something you guys may have forgotten about that I mentioned very early on in the presentation. I talked about Qodo Aware and how we do nightly code base indexing. What this is doing is this part of the review command is looking at the broader code base outside of the PR, outside of the diff. And the reason for that, think about this. When you're using the broader code base, what are the types of things that can be caught? I'll list them off. There's three popular ones. One, duplication. You're creating new functionality that's not new. There's a utility function that does that thing, like, or there's other code that does that. Reuse that code. Two, downstream impacts, right? So like you're making a change here, and how is that going to impact another part of the code? And then lastly, um, is design deviations. So like I've actually been called out here, like if I am deviating from existing design patterns that exist in the code base, it's going to call out and say like, hey, typically when this sort of thing is implemented in the other parts of the code base, it works like this. You're not doing that, right? And so this is a great way, and really takes things to a next level because for a human to go and do that, it would really require them as a code reviewer to have a really thorough understanding of kind of like the code base to be able to point those things out. And I don't know if that would happen at every single time. And I think this is just a really good example of where AI can really expand our brains a little bit to help us catch things that we might have overlooked. I'm
Yeah,
gonna talk. What's that?
I was just going to say, when the beginning of this, when you had the list of things, what was it? It was the graph or the list of things that we would care about with code review. And I guess this reminds me of, would performance be a good one to fall under this? I mean,
Ooh, yes, yes. Thank you for calling that out. Performance would be another good. I'll add this to the webinar for next month. But like performance would be another good one. Absolutely. There is and kind of in in a similar vein, I guess you could maybe call it a bug or an issue, but like there could be like race condition situations, memory leaks. So like absolutely. And I've seen those things in code reviews.
yeah.
I think that would be another great example. Thank you for calling that out.
But yes, back to the code-based context.
So in any case, the last thing I want to share that's an out-of-the-box functionality is our default functionality, I guess you could say, is what we call the improve comment. So this is where it gets a little bit more granular. We actually give you kind of a prioritized list of suggestions. Thankfully, I don't have any high suggestions, impact suggestions at this time. But like I can go, actually speaking of race condition, but like this is an example, by the way, of where it detects like there's a potential race condition here, and it's suggesting that you're actually giving me the code changes it recommends I should implement. Now, I could take this back to my IDE and fix it. In fact, I could probably fix it in even a different way. Maybe I have a better way that I want to approach that. That's fine. In fact, if you do it that way, we'll still track that it was fixed. And you'll see like this nice little strike through here to indicate that this has been taken care of. Additionally, if you're using GitHub or GitLab, you have the ability to go ahead and check this box here. Unfortunately, I don't think the Bitbucket APIs have the ability to implement for us to implement this, but you can click on apply, and that's actually going to open up a committable code comment that you can then review. And then you can even go ahead and like commit it right here in your IDE. I think this is really important because sometimes there are things that we point out. There's like the fantastic suggestions, like, oh my goodness, I'm so glad I didn't let this slip through to production, right? But then there's these intermediate suggestions or lower priority suggestions that will increase your code quality a little bit better, maybe follow your best practices a little bit better. But if you had to go back to your IDE to fix it, you might not. It's like too much effort. Like if someone opens a ticket, I'll probably deal with that at a future point, right? And so in those sorts of situations, what we find is that by implementing code changes right here with me having to not even have to leave my PR and making it that easy, people are more inclined to actually maintain those lower priority items that do impact the overall quality of code. And I just want to call that out because that is really going to be a critical piece for a lot of these people. Because again, we're targeting people who are doing code in production environments, enterprises, and so forth. So the last thing I'm going to note on this is actually if you go to our documentation, which you can Google the Codo merge documentation if you want. Um, but the idea is there's actually a tools section right here, and you can see the wide list of different tools that are available to run inside of code reviews. By default, what I showed you is describe, review, and improve, and those can be are run automatically out of the box. Any of these other commands, they can be run ad hoc, or they can even be run automated as well. You can set them up and say, hey, I really like, generating labels or whatnot on my PRs based on certain code changes and whatnot. You can have it run every time. There's a lot of flexibility in how this is run, but there is one new functionality we have. It's brand new called compliance. It's something that we're going to be using to replace review later on this year. And so I do want to highlight that for you guys real quick. We can give you a heads up on that. In fact, this is also demonstrates the ability to run commands ad hoc. So if I come down here, you'll see that just a little bit earlier today, I just posted a comment, said slash compliance. I could have done this, by the way, I could have done slash describe, improve, any of those other tools I could execute like on the fly, just running a quick command. You'll see that the bot reacted to it and then replied. Now, what compliance does, again, we use the term compliance a little bit liberally, but what compliance does is it kind of breaks it down into very concise sections here. So you're going to notice some elements of what you saw in review. So for example, ticket compliance, but we break it down into like the kind of the green, red, and then gray, which is kind of like, hey, not good or bad, something that needs to be investigated. Um, we also have security compliance. So this is actually where we're going to point out various different issues that maybe you should consider as part of security. Code duplication, we talked a little bit about. And then lastly, custom compliance. What's really exciting is you have the ability to indicate what are the types of things that are specific to your org, to your project that you want to catch in a code review and detail it out. And we will find those things. So in this particular case, the objective is all external API calls must have proper error handling. And so basically it points out here's the error handling. This is what's missing. Here's what we recommend, or here's where we're seeing the issue. And so that can be very easily added to this as well. And the format of that is really kind of drop dead simple. In fact, if we look at the documentation real quick, just to give you an example of this, where's a good example of this? Here we go. So basically all it's doing is it's looking and saying, okay, for each one, you give it a title. You indicate whether or not you want to actually add a label to the PR. You go ahead and indicate what the objective is, the success criteria and the failure criteria, and we do the rest. And so in any case, I just wanted to share that with you guys as the final part. It's a relatively new part of Codo Merge that like it's something that I expect that you guys will be using a lot more going forward. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and pause and open up the floor for the last 6 or so minutes to any other questions or topics that are on your minds. Use cases you guys have for AI that you were hoping I'd cover, other things that you've heard. Maybe you saw a blog post about us and you're wondering, hey, tell me more about XYZ. Whatever the case may be, Nana and I are here for you for the next 5 or so minutes to answer anything that might be on your minds. Oh,
We've
here's
got,
one.
yeah, go ahead.
For CodoGen, what is the suggested way to include API documentation to help understand and write code? For example, using LangChain. I've been pulling the docs from GitHub and then adding them as external docs folder in my repo. This is an interesting one. So in my recommendation, and this is not a CodoGen specific functionality. This is actually something that's baked into an MCP. There is actually, it's called Context 7. It's an MCP server. And what's really cool about this is if you add this actually as an MCP server into CodoGen, we can take advantage of this. And you just say like, hey, use context 7 in your prompt to look up LangChain documentation on something specific. And so if I go in here and I look up LangChain, for example, and do a search, you'll see that like it actually has the source documents and indexes these on a regular basis, and this can be used to augment any AI tool that you use. So this is actually a really exciting thing. If you're not familiar with it, definitely feel free to use it. Oh my goodness, back up. And so I would definitely you can also play with it here, by the way, I think in line. So one way or another, context 7. Does the system automate, simplify test generation? Great question. So, automating and simplifying test generation. So, there's out of the box things. So, in CodoGen earlier, I showed that there's an out of the box workflow that will actually generate unit tests. You can also create your own workflows or modify a workflow to like generate unit tests to your criteria. A great example, a kind of a spin on something that was talked about earlier. I had a user create a workflow that what it did was actually look at the diff of the code changes to create documentation or update documentation to reflect the recent code changes on the branch. You could do something very similar. You could create a workflow inside of CodoGen that will go ahead and create tests for just the code changes. And then another thing that we talked about earlier is that you can also use Qodo command, our CLI based tool, to even write CI based like GitHub action type of scenarios that can trigger and to be able to like automatically generate tests and whatnot. There's a few different ways. I think one of the things I'd encourage you to do is reach out to our team. And we can work with you. Basically, you can go ahead and explain to us more in detail and kind of like what your tech setup is, what your tech stack looks like, and what you're trying to achieve, and how you want and what your users are doing, and so forth. And we could help you to be able to think through the best solution for that. Either way, the solution is ultimately going to be relatively easy to implement. It's just a matter of understanding the problem, which is really kind of the key element of creating the best solution for you. In Bitbucket, is there a way to configure which repositories to apply Codo merge? There is. There is when you deploy the Bitbucket app, you should have the ability to be able to select which repositories you want to have access to. And so that's method number one. Method number two, you could actually use in the documentation. There is a way to create. What if I go in here? If I go up to use, if I go to usage guide and I look under usage guide in the documentation, there's this configuration file section, and you'll see right here, Bitbucket organization level configuration file. You could actually create an org level configuration file that, like, by default turns off automation on all repos, and then you can simply whitelist repos by using a local configuration file, which will turn on certain functionalities on those repos. Couple approaches. The app approach is the easiest, but then there's also this config file level approach that you could also use to be able to implement that. Again, if you want any help with that, let us know. Happy to be able to help out with that. What is the most surprising and creative use case you've learned a customer use Qodo for that you think is only something your solution could address? Ooh, that's a good one. Um, you know, I think the most interesting one to me that is not actually something that I think would be unique to us is someone who they wanted to label Jira tickets with a certain label that would then trigger Kodo command to go and like grab not only the details from that Jira ticket, but then grab the code and actually start working on the solution to that Jira ticket, like backlog items, stupid stuff sometimes. Or picture like you have a Jira ticket opened for a bug fix. What if we could just automatically start running in the background and updating the Jira ticket with the research we did so that when a developer comes in and starts working on it, we've already done a lot of legwork and they can kind of get to solving the problem, right? There's definitely really cool things there. I think in general, one of the things that really does distinguish us, though, that like something that our solution is uniquely positioned to address is the Codo aware side of things. I showed you earlier from the review perspective how we can look at the broader code base context to be able to point out issues that like aren't in the diff, that aren't in the PR itself, the code changes, but would be downstream impacts or things like that. On the CodoGen side, I think something that I failed to demonstrate, but I think is incredibly valuable, is the ability to use Codo Aware to grab context from remote repositories. This opens up a whole wide variety of use cases for you. You want to go and like figure out how many other projects on our company network are using fast API. You can do it. You want to figure out like, hey, I'm making changes to this API. I want to figure out how many other repos out there are using this API so that I know like which other teams I need to notify to update their code or whatnot. I want to like the list goes on. Like how many people are using the outdated API that we deprecated last year that no one should be using anymore, but still are. Like these are the types of things you could ask our broader code base understanding in addition to your more traditional use cases where it's like, I'm working on the front end, the back end's in another repo, or we're in a microservice architecture or whatever, and I'm trying to work on this one microservice in front of me, and I want to pull in context of all these other things to help me create a plan, to do research and so forth. That's one of those things that really opens up that I think really kind of distinguishes us. So hopefully that helps you, Ian. Can you speak a little on your security for private repos using your Qodo services? So generally security, we do of course use LLM vendors. Those LLM vendors, we have agreements with those vendors. There's no, everything's processed in memory on their side. There's no data retention. There's no model training. It's pretty straightforward in that regard. We send the requests, they're processed, and then they're stricken from the record. And our end, with Coda when it comes to like private repos and stuff with our services, we do logging. If you use our SaaS service, we do logging for 48 hours. And so like there would be some potentially some proprietary code snippets and things like that in there. But like that's only for support purposes. We have key staff that would only be able to access that when they need to and so forth. And so if you want to discuss that further, we could. But that's pretty much when it comes to that. And by the way, if you use Codo Aware, we encourage our customers to actually host their own database that we connect to for that so that they're in control of that data, not us. Our service will connect to that database on their network. And so, how do request points work per API request? For us, it's largely per tool request. So as you know, when an AI is going ahead and triggering requests, or so there's the prompt itself. So you go in and you type and say like, hey, help me to understand this bug fix, or how to fix this bug, or what's going on in this stack trace. That's a credit, right? But as it's progressing, it will use additional credits as it's going ahead and accessing different tools, like sending a request to Jira and processing that, and then going through and reading through your existing code base on your local laptop and so forth. Each of those tool requests do take up additional credits as part of that. I think the full details of those are probably on our website if they're not documented. But we could look into that. So anyway, that is the last one. Thank you, everybody. There's still people sticking around. You guys are fantastic. Hopefully this was helpful to you. Again, if there's anything that I missed, things that I didn't cover sufficiently, don't take offense. Reach out to us. We'd love to help you get your questions answered and help you be successful. So thank you, everyone. This will be, by the way, this recording will be posted to our YouTube channel, usually within about 24 hours. And so if you go to our YouTube channel sometime tomorrow and take a look, it'll probably be the most recent video posted if you want to review it or share it with your colleagues. Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.